I never should have picked up that last fare. 20 years of driving cabs in Chicago, and I thought I'd seen it all. But that night changed everything. It was 3 a.m., pouring rain, the kind that turns the city into a blur of neon smears. I was about to call it quits when my phone pinged. One last pickup from Lower Wacker Drive. I pulled up to the address, and through the rain-streaked windshield, I saw him. At first, I thought I was looking into a mirror somehow mounted on the street. Same gray jacket I was wearing, same worn Cubs cap, same slight limp as he approached my cab. But that was impossible, right? When he opened the door and slid into the back seat, I couldn't breathe. He had my face, not similar, identical. Every wrinkle, every scar, even the small mole above my left eyebrow. The mirror image spoke in my voice. 875 North Michigan Avenue, NU, please. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to convince myself I was hallucinating from too many hours on the road. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of something terrible. Neither of us spoke as I navigated the empty streets. In my rearview mirror, I watched him watching me. Every time I shifted in my seat, he mirrored the movement exactly. When I cleared my throat, the sound echoed from the back seat a split second later. The rain hammered against the roof, creating a rhythm that matched my racing heart. I tried to make sense of it. A twin brother I never knew about, some elaborate prank. But when I caught his eye in the mirror, I saw something behind them that wasn't human. Something ancient and cold that knew everything about me. Every secret, every fear, every dark thought I'd ever had. The GPS said we were still 10 minutes from his destination when he leaned forward. "Pull over here," he said, my voice, but wrong somehow, like it was being played backwards. I stopped the cab, my hands shaking. "You know what happens next, don't you?" he whispered. "You've been dreaming about this moment your whole life." He was right. Every night for the past month, I'd had the same nightmare, but I always woke up before I saw how it ended. "Who are you?" I demanded, but I already knew the answer. The thing wearing my face smiled, a twisted version of my own grin that made my stomach turn. "I'm you," it said. "The you that could have been, the you that should have been. Remember that night 15 years ago? The accident?" My blood ran cold. Nobody knew about that night. I'd never told a soul about the red light I ran, the crash I fled from, the guilt that had haunted me ever since. But this thing knew. Of course it knew. That person didn't die. It continued, each word like ice down my spine. They changed. They became something else. Something that's been waiting, watching, learning to be you. And now it's time to make things right. I watched in horror as its face began to shift, revealing what lay beneath my stolen features. In the rearview mirror, I saw my own reflection starting to fade, becoming transparent, while the thing in the back seat became more solid, more real. With terrible clarity, I finally understood what was happening. I wasn't the original. I was the copy, and my time was up. My hands moved without my control, unlocking the doors. My body refused to obey me as I stepped out into the rain. We stood facing each other on the empty street, water running down our identical faces. But while I was fading like a photograph left in the sun, he was becoming more vibrant, more alive. 15 years, he said, his voice now stronger than mine. 15 years trapped between what I was and what you stole from me. Do you know what it's like to watch someone else live your life? To see them waste the existence they took from you? I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Memories that weren't mine started flooding in, a different childhood, different parents, different choices. The life I thought I'd lived was unraveling like a cheap sweater, revealing the truth underneath. Each raindrop that hit my skin seemed to wash away another piece of who I thought I was. "Please," I begged, but I wasn't sure what I was begging for. Mercy? Understanding? The right to keep existing as this false version of myself? He just shook his head, wearing my face like it had always belonged to him. The change began slowly, then all at once. I felt myself becoming less substantial with each passing second, like I was being erased from reality itself. He stepped closer, and I could see the accident playing out in his eyes, but from his perspective this time. The impact, the pain. The moment when something impossible happened, splitting one life into two incomplete pieces. "I'm not a monster," he said, reaching out to touch my fading cheek. "I'm just taking back what's mine. The universe doesn't allow copies to exist forever. Balance must be restored." My voice was barely a whisper now. "What happens to me? You'll become what I was, a shadow, a memory, a dream of something that could have been. Maybe someday, you'll find someone else to become." The cycle continues. The rain fell through me now instead of on me. I could see the street lights through my hands. The last thing I heard was my own voice, but stronger, more real, saying, "Thank you for keeping my life warm for me. I'm sorry, but it's time for me to wake up from this dream." That was 3 months ago. Sometimes, I stand outside my old apartment, watching him live my life. No, his life. He does everything a little differently. He takes better care of the cab. He calls his mother more often. He volunteers at the homeless shelter on weekends. He's living the life I could have lived if I'd been a better person. I'm not alone in this half-existence. There are others like me, shadows walking the streets of Chicago, looking for a chance to become real again. We can see each other, nod in recognition as we pass. Some have been here for decades, while others are fresh arrivals, still adjusting to their transparency. The cab still runs the night shift, and sometimes I sit in the back seat, unseen, watching him pick up passengers. He never drives past accident scenes without stopping to help. He always checks if his passengers get safely inside. He's living the life I stole from him, but living it better than I ever did. And on rainy nights, when the city becomes a maze of neon reflections, I wonder, how many of the faces we see in mirrors and windows are really our own? I never believed in omens or superstitions, but what happened on my wedding day changed everything. The morning started perfectly, my white dress catching the sunlight just right, my makeup flawless, and my heart full of joy. My bridesmaids were buzzing around me like excited butterflies, making sure every detail was perfect. The church looked magical, decorated with white roses and silk ribbons. Everything I'd dreamed of since I was a little girl was coming true. But they say perfection is often the calm before the storm. I remember standing at the entrance of the church, my father's arm linked with mine, the wedding march beginning to play. That's when I first saw her. Among the sea of smiling faces, standing in the back row, was me. Not someone who looked like me, it was me, wearing the exact same wedding dress, with the exact same hairstyle. Our eyes met, and she smiled. Not a warm smile, but something that made my blood run cold. Nobody else seemed to notice her. My father felt me freeze. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he whispered. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The other me kept smiling, her eyes never leaving mine. As we walked down the aisle, she turned her head, following my movement, like a portrait in a haunted mansion. My soon-to-be husband waited at the altar, beaming with love, but all I could focus on was her. When I reached the altar, I quickly looked back. She was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Throughout the ceremony, I kept catching glimpses of her in different places, behind a pillar, in the choir loft, beside the stained glass windows. Each time she was closer. Each time that same twisted smile. The priest's words became a distant mumble. All I could hear was my heart pounding. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the ring. Then came the moment for our vows. As I turned to face my fiancé, I saw her standing directly behind him. No one else reacted to her presence. My fiancé continued smiling, waiting for me to speak my vows. But behind him, she slowly raised her finger to her lips in a shushing motion, then shook her head. The message was clear. Don't say, "I do." Cold sweat trickled down my back. The church suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. The faces of our guests began to blur together, except for hers, always crystal clear, always smiling. She mouthed something to me. I couldn't make it out at first, but then I read her lips. "He's not what you think." My fiancé squeezed my hands gently, probably sensing my distress. But his touch, usually so comforting, sent chills down my spine. I looked into his eyes, searching for something. What was I missing? What hadn't I seen? The other me started walking closer, her footsteps making no sound on the marble floor. She was now standing right beside us, close enough to touch. That's when the memories started flooding back, fragments I'd somehow forgotten. Late-night phone calls he'd quickly hang up when I entered the room. Unexplained absences, strange receipts, a glimpse of a text message that made no sense at the time. But most importantly, I remembered the night I'd caught him in his office, speaking in a language I'd never heard before. His voice distorted, inhuman. He'd explained it away as a sore throat, and somehow, I'd believed him. Somehow, I'd forgotten. The other me, my real self, was trying to break through whatever spell or manipulation had been placed on me. My fiancé's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes. They turned darker, deeper, like endless pits. He knew that I knew. His grip on my hands tightened painfully. The other me placed her hand on my shoulder, and suddenly, everything became clear. The church began to shift and distort around us. The faces of our guests melted like wax, revealing grotesque, twisted features underneath. The white roses turned black and began to drip something that looked like blood. My fiancé's handsome features started to crack like a porcelain mask, revealing glimpses of something ancient and terrifying underneath. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. The other me, my true self, grabbed my arm and pulled. For a moment, I was being torn between them. The pain was excruciating, but it wasn't physical. It felt like my very soul was being ripped apart. The stained glass windows shattered inward, but instead of falling, the glass shards hung suspended in the air, reflecting hundreds of versions of me, all screaming silently. My fiancé opened his mouth, and it kept opening, far wider than any human mouth should. With one final pull, my true self yanked me free. We ran down the aisle together as reality crumbled around us. The floor beneath our feet became a writhing mass of shadows. The wedding guests rose from their seats, moving in jerky, unnatural ways, like puppets on broken strings. Behind us, my fiancé's roar shook the very foundations of the church. We burst through the church doors into nothing, just an endless void of swirling darkness. My double grabbed my hand and whispered, "Jump." We leaped together into the abyss. I felt myself falling, spinning, dissolving. Memories rushed past me like a film in reverse. Every moment with him, every red flag I'd ignored, every time he'd made me forget. I screamed until my throat was raw, until I couldn't tell which of us was the real me anymore. Then, suddenly, I hit something hard. I woke up in my bedroom, still in my wedding dress, 1 week before the wedding. My phone was buzzing with concerned messages from my fiancé, asking where I'd disappeared to. The sun was shining through my window. Everything looked normal, but I knew better now. On my dresser was a note written in my own handwriting. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. But some fates can be avoided. Run. I packed a bag, emptied my bank account, and disappeared that morning. That was 3 years ago. Sometimes, I still see my other self in reflections or crowds, watching over me. But now, her smile is gentle, protective. As for my fiancé, well, the newspaper reported that he vanished on what would have been our wedding day. After the bride never showed up, they never found him. But sometimes late at night, I hear that inhuman language in my dreams, and I know he's still searching for me, still waiting for someone to say, "I do." I never believed in doppelgangers until I became one. It started during third period chemistry when Mrs. Parker stopped mid-lecture, staring at me with confusion in her eyes. "But I just saw you in the cafeteria," she stammered. The class turned to look at me, sitting quietly in my usual spot near the window. I laughed it off, telling her she must have seen someone else. But then the whispers started. Sarah from math swore she'd just helped me with homework in the library. Jack from the football team insisted he'd passed me jogging on the track. How could I be everywhere and nowhere at once? The strangest part? In each sighting, I was wearing the same clothes I had on that day, my blue hoodie and black jeans. My heart raced as more reports flooded in. The school was buzzing with stories of my impossible appearances, each one more unsettling than the last. But I knew I hadn't left my seat. I hadn't moved an inch. That's when the security footage arrived on the principal's desk. The footage showed me, or something that looked exactly like me, walking through different parts of the school simultaneously. In one camera, I was silently reading in the library. In another, I was walking down the science corridor. The timestamps matched perfectly. The principal called me to his office, his face pale as he replayed the videos. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his voice trembling. I felt my stomach drop as I watched myself, multiple versions of me, moving through the school with an unnatural grace. But what terrified me most was the way my duplicates moved, too smooth, too precise, like a well-choreographed dance. They never spoke to anyone. They just existed, floating through the halls like ghosts wearing my face. The worst part? In every single frame, these copies of me would occasionally turn to face the camera directly and smile. Not my usual smile, but something else. Something wrong. I started documenting everything. Every sighting, every location, every detail that seemed out of place. Students began sending me photos and videos of my other selves. In each one, the copy was perfect, down to the tiny scar above my left eyebrow. But there was always something off about their eyes. They were empty, like looking into a deep well. I created a map of the sightings, trying to find a pattern. That's when I noticed it. The appearances were forming a perfect spiral pattern throughout the school, growing tighter each day. And at the center of this spiral, the old basement laboratory, abandoned after a mysterious accident decades ago. The same lab that had been sealed off since before any of us were students here. My research led me to old newspaper clippings about experiments in quantum physics conducted in that very room. I knew I had to investigate the basement lab. Armed with just my phone's flashlight, I picked the lock after hours. The air was thick with decades of dust, but something else too, a strange electric energy that made my skin crawl. The old equipment was still there, covered in sheets like ancient ghosts. As I moved deeper into the lab, my flashlight began to flicker. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not just one set, but many, all slightly out of sync. They were coming from every direction. In the dim light, I saw them, shadows of myself, emerging from dark corners, each one moving with that same unsettling grace. They were closing in, forming a circle around me, and they were all smiling that wrong smile. I stood frozen as my copies surrounded me. One stepped forward, its movements jerky like a glitch in reality. "We've been waiting," it said, but its mouth didn't move. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The experiment was never supposed to end. Another one spoke. "Reality fractured here," a third continued. They spoke in perfect sequence, completing each other's thoughts. I learned the truth. The old experiments had torn holes in the fabric of space-time. These weren't copies of me. They were versions of myself from different realities, all bleeding into this one. But they weren't here by accident. They were here to correct what they called a deviation in the prime timeline. Me. I was the deviation they needed to fix. They gave me a choice. I could join them, become part of their collective consciousness, help them stabilize reality. Or I could try to run, but they warned that reality would continue to fracture, creating more copies, until the weight of all these overlapping existences would tear our world apart. My head spun with impossible decisions. The air grew thicker, heavier with static electricity. Shadows danced on the walls as reality itself seemed to bend and warp around us. Each version of me represented a different choice I could have made, a different path I could have taken. But which one was real? Which reality was meant to survive? The answer came to me in a moment of terrifying clarity. I chose neither option. Instead, I ran straight for the old quantum chamber in the corner of the lab. My copies tried to stop me, their movements becoming frantic, unnatural. I activated the machine, its ancient circuits humming to life. The chamber wasn't meant to merge realities, it was meant to separate them. As energy coursed through the room, I watched my copies begin to fade, each one returning to their own reality. The process was like watching photographs slowly dissolve in reverse, but something went wrong. As the last copy vanished, I felt a sharp pull, like my consciousness was being stretched across an infinite space. When I awoke, I was still in the lab, still myself. But now, when I look in mirrors, I see them sometimes. Glimpses of my other selves, watching, waiting, and I'm never quite sure which reflection is really me. It started like any other mindless scrolling session. You know that late-night rabbit hole we all fall into? Yeah, that one. I was about to log off Instagram when a mutual friend's comment caught my eye. "Great photos from your trip," they wrote, but I hadn't been anywhere in months. Curious, I clicked on the tagged profile and my heart stopped. There I was, but it wasn't me. The profile had my full name, my hometown, even my birth date. The bio was eerily similar to mine, down to the same quote I use everywhere. But the photos, God, the photos. They showed me in places I'd never been, wearing clothes I'd never owned, smiling with people I'd never met. The timestamps were recent. Last week, yesterday, 3 hours ago. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through dozens of pictures. The person in them looked exactly like me, down to the tiny scar above my left eyebrow. But I hadn't taken any of these photos. I hadn't been to these places. I hadn't met these people. I did what any rational person would do. I started digging. Each photo was perfectly crafted, as if someone had studied every detail of my life. There I was at a cafe in Paris, but I'd never left the country. Another showed me hiking in Colorado last weekend, when I hadn't left my apartment. The most disturbing part? In every photo, my eyes looked wrong. They were mine, but somehow hollow, empty. The more I investigated, the more my stomach churned. The profile had interactions with people, real people, who responded as if they knew this version of me. Comments like, "Great seeing you yesterday," and "Thanks for the coffee chat," appeared under photos of meetings that never happened. I tried reporting the profile, but Instagram said it didn't violate any guidelines. How could this be possible? I screenshotted everything, started a document to track the posts. Each one was posted at 3:33 a.m. Exactly. Never earlier, never later. The precision was maddening. Then came the direct message. "You finally found me," it read. "I've been waiting." My hands trembled as I stared at the message. "Who are you?" I typed back. The response was instant. "I'm you, the better version." They sent a photo. Me, sleeping in my bed, taken last night. I nearly dropped my phone. The angle was from my bedroom doorway. The timestamp, 3:33 a.m. I jumped up, checked every lock, every window. The message continued. "Don't bother. I'm already inside. I've always been inside." My phone buzzed again. Another photo, taken seconds ago, showing me standing exactly as I was from behind. I spun around. Nothing. But when I looked at my phone again, there was a new message. "You really should clean under your bed." My heart stopped. I hadn't looked under there in months. Things spiraled quickly after that. The account started posting photos of me in real time, doing exactly what I was doing, but from impossible angles. At work, at home, in my car, always with those hollow eyes. My friends started calling, concerned. "Why are you posting such strange things?" they asked. "Why won't you respond to us on your other account?" Other account? They showed me screenshots of conversations I'd never had, plans I'd never made. The other me was living my life in parallel, reaching out to my friends, my family, even my boss. And the terrifying part? They were all responding to it as if everything was normal. As if this hollow-eyed version of me was the real one. The posts became more frequent, the locations closer to home. Then my mom called, worried about my strange behavior at dinner last night. But I hadn't seen her in weeks. I couldn't take it anymore. I messaged the account, "Let's meet, face to face." The response came at 3:33 a.m. "We already are. Look in the mirror." I walked to my bathroom, flicked on the light. My reflection stared back, normal at first. Then it smiled, while I wasn't smiling. I stumbled backward, but my reflection stayed put, head tilted, grinning. It raised its hand and waved. I hadn't moved. "What do you want?" I whispered. My reflection's mouth moved, but the voice came from behind me. To become real. I spun around. Empty bathroom. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was gone. Instead, There was a note written in reverse on the glass. "Only one of us can exist here. Guess which one people already trust more." My phone exploded with notifications. Friends posting photos with me at a party happening right now. Family sharing pictures of me at dinner. Colleagues commenting on my presentation from today. But I was home, alone, watching my life being lived by someone, something else. The other me was perfect, more social, more successful, more alive. Each post showed a version of me that people seemed to prefer. I called my best friend desperate. "Something's wrong," I pleaded. "That's not me out there." Her response chilled me. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm looking right at you across the table." She sent a photo. There I was, sitting across from her, those hollow eyes staring directly into the camera. I looked down at my hands. They were becoming transparent. My phone buzzed one last time. "Thanks for keeping my life warm. I'll take it from here." It's been a week since I last felt real. My body is barely visible now, like a fading photograph. The other me has completely taken over, living my life better than I ever did. Nobody noticed the switch. Nobody cared. Sometimes I catch glimpses of my hollow-eyed replacement through windows or in reflections, living the life I thought was mine. The worst part? Everyone seems happier with this version. My mom says I'm more attentive. My friends say I'm more fun. My boss gave me a promotion. I'm writing this as a warning, though I don't know how much longer I'll be able to hold the phone. Check your social media. If you find another you out there, living your life, don't investigate. Don't confront it. Just run. Because once it notices you, it's already too late. Like me, you'll fade, watching your life being lived by something that wears your face better than you ever could. It started with a meeting I didn't expect. My boss called me into his office, his face pale and tense. "We need to talk," he said, sliding a folder toward me. Inside were images security footage of me, or someone who looked exactly like me, stealing equipment from the company warehouse. My stomach dropped. I had no memory of this. The timestamp showed last night, yet I'd been at home, binge-watching a show. "This isn't me," I said, but my boss wasn't convinced. My hands trembled as I pointed to the footage. "You have to believe me." Yet the evidence was overwhelming. HR suspended me on the spot. As I left the office, the air felt heavier. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the haunting sight of my face in those images, doing things I could never imagine myself doing. I couldn't sleep that night. What if I had done it? What if my mind had fractured in ways I couldn't understand? The idea consumed me. I began doubting my own sanity, retracing every step of my life over the past week. I remembered nothing unusual, just the same monotonous routine. But what if my memory was failing me? The paranoia gnawed at my mind. I avoided mirrors. I couldn't bear to see my own face. What scared me most was the eerie sense of being watched. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners of my apartment. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like footsteps. By morning, I was convinced of one thing. Something, or someone, was behind this, and I wasn't losing my mind. But proving it? That was another story entirely. Desperate for answers, I returned to the office and begged HR to let me review the footage again. To my surprise, they allowed it. As I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. The figure wasn't just similar, to meet was identical. Every movement, every detail, even the way he scratched his neck, it was me. Asterisk. But the strangest thing was his eyes. They were darker, emptier, like there was no soul behind them. I demanded copies of the footage, claiming I needed it for legal purposes. They handed over a USB drive and I left, clutching it like my life depended on it. Back home, I played the footage over and over. The way this person moved felt off, almost robotic. And then, in one chilling frame, he looked directly into the camera. His lips curled into a twisted smirk that sent shivers down my spine. I became obsessed. What was this person? I scoured the internet for explanations, diving into conspiracy theories about doppelgangers, cloning, and even supernatural entities. Nothing felt real, yet everything seemed plausible. I even questioned whether I had a long-lost twin, but deep down, I knew there was no rational explanation. Then one night, as I reviewed the footage for the 100th time, I noticed something I'd missed. In the background, behind the figure, was a reflection in a glass cabinet. A shadowy figure stood there, watching. It wasn't me or the doppelganger. This was something else entirely. My heart raced. Someone or something was orchestrating this, and it was watching both of us. Determined to uncover the truth, I set a trap. I went back to the warehouse late at night, knowing the figure would strike again. Armed with a hidden camera and every ounce of courage I could muster, I waited in the dark, surrounded by the eerie hum of silence. Hours passed. Then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the air grew icy. The lights flickered, and I heard footsteps. My heart pounded as he emerged me perfect double, moving with that same lifeless precision. I stepped out of the shadows. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He stopped, tilting his head like a curious predator. Then, in a voice identical to mine, he whispered, "You'll never escape me." Before I could react, the lights went out completely. When the lights returned, he was gone. But the camera had recorded everything. I reviewed the footage immediately, hoping to understand what I'd just witnessed. The video was clear until the moment the lights went out. For a split second, as the screen went black, there was a frame of his face inches from mine. His eyes glowed unnaturally, and his twisted smirk had returned. I showed the footage to a private investigator, but he refused to take the case. "This isn't human," he said, visibly shaken. Weeks have passed since that night, but the feeling of being watched has never left me. My reflection sometimes lingers a second too long in the mirror, and my own shadow feels like it's not entirely my own. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there. And I know one thing for certain: it's not done with me yet.